Welcome to Everyday Greatness, a nice little show proudly brought to you by major sponsor ARA Group, one of Australia's greatest supporters of community projects. Everyday Greatness is a show hosted by a real human being, talking to some real people about real human issues that will help make you feel proud again of simply being a good solid Joe bag of donuts. Here's your host, Barnaby Howarth.
Welcome to Everyday Greatness, and thanks for listening. This is a show designed to celebrate the greatness inside everyday people. So grab a drink, kick your feet up, and settle in. Before I start today, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of Australia. I think acknowledging Indigenous Australians is more important than just reading from a generic, impersonal script. So I'd like to honour our traditional owners from the heart. I love being an Australian. So I'd like to honour those who came before us, those who share their land with us today, and those who follow us. Some of the things that have happened in this country in the past embarrassed me as a white Australian. So I'd like to acknowledge that I feel horrible for any pain that's been caused. But I'd also like to acknowledge how beautiful Australian Aboriginal culture, your past, your place in today's society, and your future are. Thank you for sharing your country with us. Before I start our first interview, I'd like to acknowledge as well our episode sponsor, Facade Digital. Facade Digital are a bespoke digital marketing company with over 15 years of experience in marketing, public relations, events, academia, and digital marketing. So thank you Fabrizio and the team at Facade Digital for sponsoring this episode. If you're raising a puppy dog and it keeps weeing on the floor, you could yell and scream, rub its nose in the puddle and kick it outside, and it will obey you for the next 30 seconds or so, but then it will forget the whole incident and do the same thing again not long after. Or you could gently explain why going to the toilet inside was wrong, spend some time with your puppy dog outside and explain where it should be doing its business and rewarding them when they do the right thing. Once they learn what they've done, once they learn what they've done wrong, they will stop it and not do it again. Dogs might not understand what authentic leadership is, but they'll sure as hell respect it when they see it. Whether you're trying to raise a puppy dog, a child, a business group, or a sporting team, there's more than one way to get results. And your group or your puppy dog will see right through you if you don't practice what you preach. My guests today, General Manager of Snacks at Nestlé Australia, Susan Catania, and Head of Companion Animal Business at Boehringer Ingelheim, Michael Cousens. Both set perfect examples of what authentic leadership is. They tell their teams to try and be a good person, and they both lead by example. Mahatma Gandhi once said, "Happiness is when what you think, what you say, and what you do are all in harmony." And that perfectly sums up my first guest, General Manager of Snacks at Nestlé Australia, Susan Catania. Susan is one of the happiest people in Australia because what she thinks, says, and does are all in harmony. Authenticity in the real world can be very deep and philosophical, but when you boil it all down to its simplicity, it basically says to try and be a good person and respect the people around you. I'm almost certain there's a nice way to link the following riddle with Susan's happiness and confidence, but I can't think of how to do it. So I'll just explain both and hope she's catching what I'm pitching and doesn't get offended. The riddle says, what gets bigger the more you take out of it? And the answer is a hole. And this is where drawing a parallel keeps falling down. I can't think of a nice way to say Susan is like the hole in that riddle. But the point is, Susan is a happy, confident person. But the more she gives her happiness and confidence back to the world, the more her own stocks seem to grow. I really hope there was a nugget of genuine praise in that introduction. But if not, I should leave it there and introduce one of the most authentic people on earth, Susan Catania. Susan, thank you for joining me on Everyday Greatness.
Thanks for having me, Barnes. Appreciate it.
Tell us first what a day in the life of Susan Catania looks like.
Well, at the moment, it's like most people, probably two jobs. First of all, mum to Eddie, who's my 6-year-old son in kindergarten. So the joy of homeschooling at the moment is in my life. And secondly, as you've mentioned, the general manager of snacks at Nestlé, looking after brands like Uncle Toby's and Milo, which is a huge privilege. Obviously, Eddie pretty much bookends my day at the beginning and the end, but in the middle, there is certainly both roles require lots of communication, lots of meetings, and certainly organisation and decision making.
You must have to get a lot of different messages across to a lot of different people. How do you get those messages across to different people in your life, your family, friends, and your work colleagues?
You become very effective at compartmentalising your life. I find that, I have a really good knack of really shutting off different parts of my life to really be able to focus and prioritise on whoever it is that I'm either with at that time, talking to, or connecting with. And I think if you can prioritise that moment and be present in that moment, it will certainly make sure that you're listening and you're connecting. And actually, even my son says to me, Mummy, be present. Sometimes if I'll pick up my phone when I'm sitting on the lounge watching Bluey with him. And so I think it's a good lesson for him to hold me accountable too. So really, I think it's about focus and prioritisation, if I'm honest.
Just being a normal human being, just being your real self, seems like it'd be an odd thing to study. Can you just explain in layman's terms what authentic leadership is?
It's a really good question. And when I went through my MBA at Macquarie, I read lots of research and into lots of information around different evidence on what it actually is. And the way that I unpack it the best is separating authenticity and leadership and then putting it back together. And for me, authenticity is being consistently you. But leadership is about being self-aware and it's about being selfless. So, my definition would be being a consistently you in a self-aware and selfless way. And as you said with Mahatma Gandhi, consistency is in what you say and you do, and it's that old adage of practicing what you preach. It's about leading with your heart, not just your mind. And I think so often, even if you think about when we interview people, we focus so much on IQ, but how do you make sure you're focusing on EQ and IQ? And then demonstrating and being really comfortable to demonstrate a level of vulnerability, humbleness, empathy in everything that you do. Because ultimately it's not like, you look in the mirror and you go, yes, I am an authentic leader. It's the people in your teams, it's your people in your family or on the sporting field that say, I see in you an authenticity and I feel from you an authentic leader. And I think that's the most important thing.
Very well summed up. If part of authentic leadership is to understand and acknowledge your strengths and weaknesses, isn't that counterintuitive to what most people are taught these days, in that showing vulnerability makes you look weak?
It's an interesting point you raise, and I think it really demonstrates how much leadership has evolved, especially probably the last 20 years. Because we have to evolve leadership in response to people, their needs, but certainly their expectations. And things like COVID even have taught us that, times are changing and people's expectations and the paradigms of leadership are changing. In the past, it was very much autocratic and it was so task-focused, whereas today it's so much more collaborative and it's so much more people-focused. And if you think about being people-focused, you have to have softer skills. You have to have the ability to engage with them, to empower them to be more competitive. So things like agility and creativity aren't going to come from not being able to be inspired and empowered. And ultimately, vulnerability, I believe, is the key driver of that, because it's the human aspect, it's the human approach where you connect with people. Don't get me wrong, though. Like I think if you asked anyone in my team, they would say that I'm authentic, but I'm still decisive and I'm still direct, but I do it with empathy and an understanding of my impact on other people.
That leads me to my next question, which I'll ask on behalf of my father. Is it risky trying to exercise integrity in today's Australian business world? Are there too many ruthless operators who'll drag you down if you're trying to be a good person?
Well, some people might feel that, but in my opinion, if you don't have values and you don't have integrity, what do you have? Because there will always be opposing values, opposing styles, opposing agendas. But with over 50% of what a leader brings every day coming from themselves and confidence in themselves, if you don't have confidence in yourself and your team then wouldn't have confidence in you, how could you possibly have confidence in yourself if you don't have integrity? I think that leading with integrity absolutely at times can be a bit sticky because of the situation and potentially, the opposition sort of headwinds coming your way. So it takes good judgment and definitely careful application. But it's so important to really make sure that you're bringing it to the table consistently.
Very well said. Operating with integrity would have been really challenging at Nestlé, I'd imagine, during coronavirus. There would have been so many sad stories to cater to. How difficult has the last period been for you guys?
It's a really good question. And I think coronavirus is a time for people and organisations with integrity to shine, because it's actually when you turn your focus to people, and that's actually what you needed to do most. It reminded us of what was most important, even personally or professionally. It really gave you a level of gratitude. It showed us the importance and the value of sort of taking responsibility for yourself, but also others. We had just a gentleman that who mentors me, actually. I'm so fortunate, in Nestlé India. His name's Suresh. He's a chairman and managing director of our business there. And, India was one of the first countries that was hit with the Delta variant. Like April, May this year. And when I was talking to him, he was sharing that in the period of about 4 weeks, he had 12 of his team members that passed away, from as young as 33 and as old as 48. And he talked about at that time the importance of compassion overtaking confidence, and that we really need to reflect on what's important at every point in time, which is obviously, number one, you as a leader being confident, acting with vulnerability but still being stoic, but focusing relentlessly on keeping people as safe and as healthy as possible. And I loved, he actually shared that the most important thing for him that he kept asking himself was, what would my mum do? And I think that's a really honest account, right? When something so significant happens, it's what would my mum do? Well, she'd call to ask if I'm okay. She would ask if she could help. These are all the things that leaders just go right back to the basics and take away all the jargon, all the garbage, and just be a human. And that's what authentic leadership's about.
That's a beautiful question to put in front of any difficult situation. What would my mum do?
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk practical. How do you keep being a good person focused on integrity without being a pushover?
Well, as I said earlier, you can still be authentic, and have absolute integrity, but still be decisive and direct. It's just that you do it in a self-aware way. So instead of being really direct and not thinking about impacts, or being really direct and not considering broader opinions or views, it's actually just thinking about that before you start. And it's almost that, start with the end in mind. Yes, the end in mind is an outcome, but there's also the people and the change that has to happen in that time. So I think it's just being, considerate of that journey.
Very true. Who do you personally try and model your own leadership style on?
No, I wouldn't say I model my leadership style on anyone in particular, because it probably wouldn't be authentic, but I take so much learning off lots of different people. And Suresh was one example that I just shared. We catch up, probably every month to 6 weeks whenever, diaries allow. And I'm so fortunate because he's, 60 and much further along the journey than me, but we're also very similar in lots of ways. But we don't talk about numbers and results and KPIs and strategy. We talk about people and culture. We talk about managing businesses through crisis. We talk about learnings from myself here to him there, to help make us stronger, better leaders. And that to me is super inspiring and certainly helps form and also give me confidence in my approach. And the second would be someone like Jacinda Ardern, because obviously not everyone knows or has a connection with Suresh in Nestlé India. But if you look at her in the face of mosque attacks, earthquakes, COVID, she's been, really held up in high stead for her management of that. I think she brings a real naturalness. She brings her whole self. She makes no shame of bringing her husband and her child as part of her and who she is. She speaks always about us and we, not I and you. And she really has this coolness under pressure, but still real decisiveness, and is happy to stick her neck out and say, no, this is not great for New Zealand. And I think that's really powerful and really encouraging.
You spring chicken, you. Suresh is 60 and he's so much further down the road than I am.
I know. He said that to me and I was like, you know what, I'm going to take that, Suresh. Thanks. He's like, I like helping young people like you. And I was like, oh, thank you. I've been at Nestlé for 18 years, but that's great if you think I'm still young. I'll take it.
Well, if it floats your boat, take it.
Yeah, exactly.
How proud of yourself are you as a female leader in today's business world?
I always grapple. I get asked this question a little bit, and I always grapple with it because I'm incredibly proud of myself as an individual, as someone that is so grateful to be in the role I am in and have the opportunities I have. And sometimes I pinch myself and I go, this young girl that was born down the South Coast and has, had a really tough upbringing, but has worked her backside off to get where I am, and I'm really grateful for that. And honestly, it's such a privilege, and I'm sure anyone that's in a leadership position would feel the same. But I don't see it as any different for me being a female. Like I don't feel it, I don't see it, and I'm sure others do. And I think especially being in a more traditional male role, where general management, business director sort of roles are typically more men. But all I do is focus on being who I am every day and being the best leader I can. I focus on all the meaningful relationships that make a difference to me and to their lives, and I do the best I can. And then ultimately that's all we can do, right? We're all humans just trying to do the best we can every day.
That's very cool to hear. I've heard from a lot of female leaders and sports people who don't think being a female is any big deal. If they're the best candidate, they deserve the job. So it's really cool to hear that you feel the same way.
Yeah, absolutely. I've never felt the impact of being female in a male world, or going head to head and having a negotiation with a strong, experienced male. Or I've never felt exposed or vulnerable at all. And I think it comes from what you mentioned at the beginning. You have to have a confidence in yourself as an individual, and if you do, the rest will come.
That's very cool to hear. So tell people, again, the people who don't understand what authentic leadership is, how is being vulnerable, empathetic, inclusive and understanding a benefit in the workplace today? Do you have any practical examples of people who wouldn't be where they are if it weren't for some gentle, guiding support from authentic leaders around them?
Well, I'm a perfect example of probably someone that wouldn't be where I am today if I didn't have that support. But all those things you list, vulnerability, empathy, being inclusive, having understanding, it's all ultimately what drives connection. And that's what we all want, right? Like whether it be at home, with our friends, at work, we all want connection because ultimately that's what gives us purpose in life. And it's the glue that brings people together from being individuals to being teams. It's also then what helps deliver results and make people feel satisfied. And, the word for me that comes to mind is fulfillment. I think that when you have all those things and you feel that you can achieve fulfillment. At work, I'd hate to even guess, but I coach and mentor a lot of people. I never say no to coaching or mentoring. It's actually one of my passions. And my PA is often, we've got another person. I'm like, yep, find the time. And I too have my own mentors. As I said, I have Suresh, but I reach out to them for guidance and reassurance. One of the gentlemen I've worked with in my journey, who I've known for quite a long time, probably 12 or 13 years, is an up-and-coming leader, and he was on a formal sort of leadership mentoring program at Nestlé, and I'd partnered with him, and he'd been given a task, which is a template to go away and write his leadership philosophy. And so he followed the template and he brought it to me. He's like, Suze, this is my leadership philosophy. And I know this guy quite well. And I said, mate, that's bullshit. Like, that's not you. That's not you. That's you thinking with your head, but is that you? And this gentleman, Italian background, mad passion about his family, about sport. He loves soccer. And I just said to him, go away, put the template away and just go away and just go sit in the middle of a footy field. We'll go sit at the middle of your dinner table at a family dinner on a Sunday arvo and think about what it means for you to be part of that family, but to lead that family or to lead that soccer team and come back. And what he came back with was from the heart. It was authentic. It was him on a page. And that to me was, a really important thing. And I think you can follow processes, you can follow tools and guidelines, but actually it's getting inside your own heart, being super self-aware in that moment and bringing that and just seeing him and how he connected to that and the passion was really powerful.
Again, very cool. Let's step outside business for a second. You mentioned your 6-year-old son earlier. What sort of person do you hope your son will grow up to be?
Well, I'm looking forward to him not being a 6-year-old rat bag. But in all honesty, the first thing I think is a confidence in himself. I think so often you see people that lack confidence and most importantly lack confidence in themselves. And I think that can be just soul destroying. So confidence in himself, considerate of others. And initially I wrote kind and I thought kind, but actually considerate's really important because sometimes it's not about being kind, it's about being decisive or it's about making, the tough decisions. But being considerate of others is really important. And he's going to have a level of resilience and forgiveness because the world is changing rapidly. It's moving quickly. There's so much that's happening around us in the environment, in things like COVID, and how he has, an ability to work through that with resilience, but also a level of forgiveness so you don't carry regret or anger or frustration with you, I think will be really important.
Susan Catania, I really appreciate you spending the time on Everyday Greatness and I appreciate hearing your pearls of wisdom.
Thanks, Barnes. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Leading teams to success is an ironic business. Sometimes the best way to get success is to understand a disappointment leading up to it. Losing a preliminary final, failing your driving test, or missing out on a promotion are some of the best ways to make sure you succeed next time. The head of companion animal business at Boehringer Ingelheim, Michael Cousens, understands that sometimes bad things are the perfect motivation to get good things next time. Michael coached 2 premierships in 3 years as coach of the Pennant Hills Demons Australian Rules Football Club. The first premiership was a tight win. The following year, the team went into the finals as minor premiers and were almost certain to win the premiership again. But the pressure got to the boys and they were bundled out of the finals before winning a game. But Michael used that disappointment to galvanise the club and bring everybody together. And they went back the next year and won the second premiership by over 100 points. Losing is not a guaranteed way to bring success next time. It takes a strong leader to help people understand that rain falls on the just and the unjust alike, but there comes a time when you just have to get over it and go and play in the puddles. If you type in the phrase authentic leader on Google, you'd see a picture of Michael Cousens with his thumbs up like the Fonz. Michael leads by example. He just tries to be a good, solid human being. And whether he's coaching a sporting team, he's operating as a business leader, or he's just a father or a friend, people follow. And I'm privileged to say that Michael Cousens joins me now on Everyday Greatness. Michael, thank you and welcome.
Thanks, Barnaby. Great to be here.
You coached a community AFL team to 2 premierships in 3 years, and you're in charge of an entire business department, companion animal business at Boehringer Ingelheim. What are the differences between leading a sports team to leading a business group?
The truth is, Barnes, I don't know if there is a difference. I mean, I think leading teams is leading teams, whether they be professional teams, sporting teams, community, social, musical, whatever. I mean, I think in the football club context, you could be excused for assuming that it is a little bit different, and people are there within the context of, look, they're not getting paid. They just want to be there because they love the game, they love the people, they love the environment, whatever it is for them. On the flip side, you could be excused for thinking, people are only there because they need to earn an income, and that's their only reason for being there. But in thinking about both bodies, people are there for whatever reason they're there. And ultimately, sort of, I suppose, in a leadership capacity, you just have to understand what that reason is for each individual. And ultimately, if you can do your best to accommodate those reasons or those motivating factors, and support the individuals around that, then there's a good chance that will culminate in the greater collective sort of realising what they're wanting to realise as well. So yeah, I'm not sure if there are differences actually.
In saying that, then, that there's not any difference between business and sport, which leaders have you tried to emulate in business and then separately in sport?
Yeah, look, I don't know if I ever sort of try to emulate anyone, as opposed to, look, there's many points of reference. You can observe all sorts of traits, methods, attributes, things from good leaders, things from bad leaders. You can bring it to the table. And I suppose throughout the course of my professional and sporting life, there's been incredible exposure to multiple, managing directors, CEOs, department heads, or coaches, to sort of basically learn things by. There's no shortage of other literature or principles of leadership that you might want to pursue. Interestingly enough, I've only recently attended the Infinite Game by Simon Sinek, who talks about traits of leadership as well. But look, I suppose what I've come to believe is that it's very situational. Different situations might require different things from you within a leadership context, and I suppose ultimately that's what I try and emulate is an approach or a method or a line of thought that best fits the situation. And yep, sometimes that could be a loss in a sporting game, or it might be that you didn't quite get the tender that you were going for with a critical customer. So that's probably where I go, Barnaby, more a consideration of situation versus actually trying to emulate anyone I've observed.
Very well said. Now, I want to ask you about the Pennant Hills Demons' 2 premierships in 3 years. But before I do, though, given the deep love and respect both of our football clubs have, who did you beat in those 2 years?
It was the East Coast Eagles, Barnes, which I think you know very well. 2006, they were the undefeated side going into the grand final. They were the absolute benchmark. Whereas in 2008, they'd actually stormed into the grand final, having finished 4th or 5th, I think, and won 3 consecutive finals to make it. But yeah, look, I suppose at the end of those 2 games, we were on the right side of the ledger by the time the final siren went.
That felt so sweet hearing you say that. Thank you very much. Tell me about the Demons' journey over those 3 years. How confident were you guys would win the premiership in that second year when you went in favourites?
Look, I think the short answer is I actually wasn't confident, Barnaby. I mean, the year that we won the flag in 2006, I actually hoped that we would simply win one final. The club had come off a couple of years where, unfortunately, they'd had consecutive seasons of losing finals, not even winning a final, whether it's a knockout final, a semi-final, elimination, whatever it was. So I was of the mindset that if we could at least win one final, then we've actually realised something more than what we had before. As far as year 2 came along, again, I don't think I was overly confident. If anything, I probably was too emotionally invested in wanting to try and emulate the year before. And I think as a direct result of that, I put probably too much pressure on myself, and I don't believe I actually coached very well at all, particularly in the finals campaign that saw us go out in straight sets. But I suppose year 3, the 2008 year of redemption, if you want to call it, I just simply wanted to make amends. I didn't know if we could. I'd hoped that we would by just doing some things differently and seeing if we could actually learn from the experience that was the year before. And as fate would have it, that seems to be what we managed to do.
It's very modest of you to say fate would have it. How did you practically galvanise the team after that disappointment of year 2 to win the premiership the following year? What practical steps did you take?
Oh, look, I think the immediate thing was we just admitted that we got it wrong. And I suppose from my own sort of internalisation of the whole situation, as I said before, I just realised that I just became too emotionally invested in trying to realise the same result and lost the ability to really look at the situation objectively, literally try and read the play and make the adjustments that maybe I could have made at that time to culminate in a different result. So that was probably the first thing. The other thing I did was that I actually got help. My first 2 years of coaching, I pretty much did it on my own. I didn't have an assistant or a number of assistants like you see in the modern day now, but I rectified that pretty quickly and acquired the support of a bit of a club stalwart in Christopher Yard to be my assistant, and he's did a great job and has obviously since been the Premier Division coach and a successful premiership coach himself in the years since. So that was a good move. And I think the other thing I did was sort of, realise what our opportunity was, but also took a bit more of a vested interest in what the opposition might do. The importance of maybe anticipating things go wrong, and if they do, what's going to be your contingency. So I think we started to look at it a little bit more broadly than maybe what we did in 2007 and obviously got caught out not actually doing that. So they'd probably be the 3 things.
A lot of people see sporting success, dynasties and successful clubs as something like rocket science and some voodoo magic power fueling it all. Was winning 2 premierships in 3 years rocket science, or was it simply a matter of having that help around you, the good people who just made good decisions?
Yeah, look, it certainly wasn't rocket science, I don't think, Barnaby. Look, it started with what I was lucky enough to inherit. Danny Ryan very well. He'd been the coach before me and he'd put the club in an incredibly strong position. No surprise that he's gone on to coach at the elite level, and be that at sort of AFL ranks or VFL ranks. And he'd got the club really, really close. So, ideally it was only going to be maybe a slightly different voice, a few tweaks here and there that could help the club get to that ultimate peg, so to speak. So I don't think his contribution can be understated. But then to your point about good people, a lot of these names probably won't mean much maybe to your broader audience, but, straight off the bat, Lane Spencer, Greg Barnes, Harry Ellison, Chris Yard I mentioned, Daniel Kennedy, Blair Hathley, Pete Campbell, Pete Jack, Chicken, or Ian Parker as he's known, even Ross Howarth, dare I say it, Barnaby. These people were all integral. And then there was all the significant people of those significant people that ultimately contributed to the greater good. But look, I think ultimately we didn't do anything cutting edge. We just tried to keep it really simple. At the end of the day, across the total playing list, you're going to have to accommodate an array of different personalities, different abilities, different intensities. So it was really important to adopt an approach that really everyone firstly could understand, but then also have the capability to execute. So I think that, along with making sure that we had some fun along the way, I think that's a really important factor, whether it's sport, whether it's work. Life is pretty serious enough without making it more serious. So that was, I think, a pretty important ingredient to the success of it as well.
Now, I could quite easily sit and talk about Pennant Hills beating East Coast Eagles in grand finals all day, but we should move on and talk about business.
We should.
Let me talk to you about Boehringer Ingelheim. Are there any times at work when you have to catch yourself, when you give you the same advice you give to young people at football as you are at work?
I mean, look, it happens all the time, but I'd have to say that I don't probably catch myself and think that I shouldn't do that. I think it comes back to your original question about whether there's differences or not in the two areas, and the essence of that is I don't think there are. I mean, your tone, your verbal or non-verbal language might change, but the underlying principle of what you're trying to do or what you're trying to realize, drive, deliver, it sort of doesn't change. I mean, it just genuinely, in my view, works both ways, whether it be translating what you've learned in the workplace to your sporting environment or vice versa. It's really quite transferable. I mean, if I think about coaching football, I mean, I was lucky enough that I'd received a lot of coaching development through my workplace, and I translated a lot of that into the footy club, to be honest. And yeah, I've obviously done it in the other way as well.
Motivating people in sport is very predictable. It's the big rev up chats before the game. I'm assuming you don't have rev up chats for your business teams before work every day. How do you motivate your staff if they get a bad result?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, you do give the rev up chats, but they're probably just far more measured. They're more considered. There's more professional context to it. And it's obviously not the environment of the footy sheds, but you're still trying to ultimately do the same thing. You're trying to guide, you're trying to inspire, or you're helping to try and drive or generate an outcome, be it a project or a business result. But look, where I'm a huge adage, and it probably goes back to a huge advocate, goes back to your introduction, is that, if you get the bad result, where there's huge motivation in that because you just learn so much from it. And fortunately, I've experienced a hell of a lot of bad results. And what it does is it gives you an incredible point of reference or scope for reflection for the next time. And in many respects, realizing the good result on the back of a bad result is arguably far more satisfying than just realizing the good result straight off the bat. But look, it does come back to what I said before. Ultimately, if the bad result is there, how do you keep them motivated? Well, you just keep going back to why they're there in the first place. What's the reason, or what's their motivating factor for being in the role or in the group? And what can you do to actually make sure that those reasons or factors are being realised? I mean, even a person that says, "Oh, look, I'm only here because I need the money." Well, in that scenario, you just simply try and help that person do the best job that they can, so that need isn't compromised or lost. So I think it's really understanding the drivers that's probably the critical component to helping people be motivated to get a different result next time.
You're a very wise man. You could be the pin-up boy for authentic leadership. Is being authentic an image you have created? Do you devote any mental energy to staying authentic, or is that just how you roll?
Yeah, look, it's an interesting question, Barnes. I sort of thought about it from the point of, I think if you're trying to create an image of authenticity, or if you're devoting too much mental energy to it, I don't know if you actually can say that you're truly authentic. So I think that the simple answer is, look, I don't sort of work on it as such, but what I do know I try and bring is I do try and bring an element of realism. I do think I bring a genuine capability to listen. A reasonable level of EQ or an ability to read the play, as I mentioned earlier. I mean, what has been suggested to me is that I do have a capability of sort of considering all the information that's in front of me and assessing gaps and opportunities within those, but also then being able to explain it pretty clearly or pretty articulately that people get it and they can buy into it. I've mentioned humour. I think a sense of humour or an ability to see the lighter side of things is what I try and bring. But I also have a genuine desire to just see people do well in their work, in their life. And if I can help them, realise the things that they're wanting to realise, well, I find that incredibly gratifying. I think importantly, I've got enough confidence to ask for help or admit that I don't actually have the answer. and I've once been described as having a really healthy level of self-doubt, which means that I rarely get too far ahead of myself. And if I do, I think I do have a reasonable ability to tell myself to pull my own head in and drop down a couple of pegs. I think that's really important to be able to know when maybe that's the path you're on.
A healthy level of self-doubt sounds like a very interesting quality. How does Boehringer Ingelheim more broadly develop leadership across their whole organisation?
Yeah, look, I mean, it's at the end of the day, Barnaby BI, it's a multinational and it's heavily invested in its people. It does a hell of a lot to help establish leaders and enable them to grow multiple programs, varying sort of curriculum that they have, emerging leadership programs they run, managers coaching programs, of course. I mean, I was lucky to attend a program known as BI Connectivity, which is basically global leaders of businesses for BI around the world coming together to work with each other and to talk about whether or not we, in our capacity, in our individual operations at a country level, are really living the company mission and vision. I mean, this was pre-COVID times. It was 2019, but the chance to go to Frankfurt and Duke University in the US to attend to 2 single-week programs to work through those discussion points was amazing and an incredible opportunity to get that sort of level of exposure and insight to different people, be they colleagues from within the business or actually lecturers from Duke University. It was amazing. But I mean, I think the other thing we do have is a genuine feedback culture. We're really encouraged to seek out feedback all the time, so that we can take that on board and grow and adapt. I mean, 360-degree feedback tools are critical in that, and I would strongly advocate any manager to exercise those opportunities around 360 whenever they can. But yeah, there are a few of the things that BI ultimately do.
That sounds tremendous. Are there any leadership tricks you've picked up from football or business that translate to the real world? Or do you need to be a different person in your real life than what you are in business?
Look, I think our own work version of ourselves it's always going to be a little bit different to maybe the non-working version of ourselves, but I personally don't believe the gap needs to be too great. I mean, the bottom line is we are who we are, and if you're having to work really hard at being someone that you're not, then it probably isn't sustainable, and it's probably not going to work. If anything, you'll probably get found out that's the case. I mean, at the end of the day, I'm incredibly fortunate that I work for an organisation who genuinely values me for who I am. And I think I can safely say that after 25 years with BI, albeit in many different roles. But as a result of that, I'm really able to be myself as much as is reasonably possible within my working environment. You know, the business, they take the good with the bad and they support me either way, because I've as I said earlier, I've made lots of mistakes in my career, but I'd like to think that my successes have outnumbered those mistakes. But it is a really cool place to work, and I've been, very fortunate to be there. I think the funny thing is that I actually started my working life as a grade 1 primary school teacher, where I was the biggest kid in the class. I think 25 years on, nothing's probably changed. I think I'm a bit the same within the workplace. But yeah, look, I don't think there needs to be too much of a difference, Barnaby, between who you are in your real life and who you are in your business life.
Well, that segues very well. Let me ask you about Michael Cousens, the real human being. What do you define as success these days as a father of 3 boys?
Well, given my lads are sort of late teens or early 20s, I think success is, they're law abiding and maybe they pay their own way. But more seriously, I think ultimately success is that they're healthy, they're safe, they're happy, and they're fulfilled in the lives that they're living and perhaps the future that they're pursuing. I mean, I don't imagine that matters whether you're a father of boys or girls or both, or a mother of boys or girls or both. I mean, in the case of my 3, I think success is that, hopefully they're just good blokes. I hope they're just good fellas.
Is that what you would say you want them to be defined by if they're successful people, just good people, or do you want something higher, well paid, best, most important positions, sports coaches?
No, look, I really think it is that they're because ultimately, Barnaby, I think if they are good people, then those things will genuinely come. And look, I would, with all biases, obviously, I really think they are great fellas. I mean, they're hilarious. They're fun to be around. They have tremendous senses of humour. But I think importantly, they're incredibly loyal. They're incredibly accountable more often than not. They're respectful to everyone around themselves, including their mum and dad, their extended families, their friends. It's a real credit to them. And look, it hasn't always been easy for them. They have had their own sufferings of their own creation or things that, they really didn't have much say in, namely a marital breakdown between their mum and I. But they've handled it incredibly well. And, at this particular point in time, ironically, like right now, I just couldn't be more proud of them. I sort of love them to bits and just can't wait to see what life continues to offer them. But I think they're heading in a terrific direction.
Very lucky boys. So, Michael, you are a successful bloke. You won premierships as a sports coach and you are a respected business leader. Do you think it's enough these days just to try and be a good person, work as hard as you can and respect the people around you? Focus on the game plan, have faith the result will take care of itself, if you will. Or do you need to be ruthless, aggressive and have some mystical X factor to get ahead?
I think the short answer, Barnaby, is ruthless and aggressive. No, you don't have to be that. Be a good person, work hard and be respectful. Absolutely. I think the thing you do have to do is that you, particularly in leadership, you've got to be kind to yourself, because leading people and teams, it actually is really hard. You're not always going to get it right. Things are going to go wrong. Mistakes will be made, but more often than not, it's on the back of these sorts of things where the wins really come. I think to your point about focusing on the game plan, that's really important. But what I've also come to learn is that it's really important to have a backup plan, or an ability to evolve or adapt as things change, because things will change. Whether it's your number one centre forward going down with an ACL 20 minutes into a semi-final, or if it's the job that you really wanted, you just didn't get, it went to someone else. You're going to have to think about that. You're going to have to change. You're going to have to try a different method, adopt a different approach. And as long as you're willing to accept that's going to happen and be prepared to implement the changes, well, then you might still realise the ultimate outcome that you're looking for anyway. But yeah, look, I think you actually really just have to have, and maybe this is the mystical X factor, but it's not that mystical, is that you ultimately just have to have a real natural desire to want to help others realise their goals and ambitions. And if you have that within you, I think ultimately you can be a really successful leader.
Well, Michael Cousens, and to Susan Catania as well, a lot of people think that to be a successful business leader, it's all scientific and they've got to read this book and watch this TEDx talk. But you guys have just put it in such real layman's terms and you're just real human beings getting ahead in life. So, Michael, thank you for your time.
Thanks, Barnes.
Thank you to Michael and Susan for joining me on Everyday Greatness today. Thank you all for listening. Thanks to the ARA Group for being our major sponsor for the 4th year in a row. Thanks to Facet Digital for sponsoring this episode. Thanks to Look Studio Australia for recording this podcast. And I hope that when you put your devices down in a little while, you lift your head up, push your shoulders back and walk down the street proud of being an everyday Joe Bag of Donuts. I hope you can join us for our next episode, where I'll be speaking to the founder of the Stay Kind Foundation, Ralph Kelly. I'll be speaking to Ralph about how he makes the world kinder after seeing the worst of it. If you'd like to find out more about that episode, today's episode, or everyday greatness in general, go to our website, everydaygreatness.com.au, or follow us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, or LinkedIn. Thank you again for joining me.